Jerusalem, the city of peace, the city of our King, and the place where heaven touched earth through the temple of Yahuwah. But what if? We've misunderstood this city's most sacred geography for over 2,000 years. What if the temple didn't stand where we've been told? What if Mount Zion isn't where our maps say it is? And what if the man responsible for that confusion was one of the heroes of the Hanukkah story? Today, we uncover the shocking legacy of Simon the Hasmonean, the man who moved Mount Zion, and in doing so, may have buried the memory of the true location of the temple of God. More than 2,000 years ago, Jerusalem was under siege. The Seleucid Empire, descendants of Alexander the Great's fractured empire, had built a fortress, the Acra, high above the city. It was a constant reminder that pagan powers ruled the land of Israel. And worse, this fortress looked down upon the temple itself. It was a daily humiliation, a desecration. The people of God worshipped, while being watched from above by foreign soldiers. That tension gave birth to a revolution, the Hasmonean Revolt, a war not just for freedom, but for faith. Simon, brother of Judah Maccabee, became a key leader of that movement, and after defeating the Seleucids and driving them from Jerusalem, he set out to restore the honor of the city and the holiness of the Temple Mount. But Simon didn't just destroy the Acra fortress. He ordered the entire hill it stood on to be leveled. Yes, leveled. He cut down Mount Zion. Why? Because he didn't want any structure, no palace, no fortress, no high place, to ever again rise above the house of God. He wanted the temple to be the highest and most dominant feature in Jerusalem. And so, over the next 3 years, workers cut through solid rock, removing the foundation of the hill where the Acra had stood. It was one of the most ambitious earthworks projects in all of ancient Israel. This act physically reshaped Jerusalem, but it also created a trail of confusion. Because after Mount Zion was leveled, Simon shifted many government functions and buildings to a new area, the southwestern hill. This hill, larger and now elevated, became the new civic center. And over time, it was also given a new name, Mount Zion. This is where the confusion began. The original Mount Zion, according to the Bible, was part of the city of David, located on the eastern ridge near the Gihon Spring. But after Simon's reorganization, Mount Zion became associated with the southwestern hill, a completely different area. And over the centuries, the memory of the true Zion was lost. So was the memory of the temple's true location. But here's the most important part. Simon did not destroy the temple. By the time he ruled, the second temple, built after the Babylonian exile, had already stood for nearly 400 years. Simon's goal was not to harm it, but to exalt it. So while the temple remained intact, the mountain beside it, the original Mount Zion, was permanently altered. And that's the critical piece. Simon's efforts ensured that no foreign power would ever overlook the temple again. But in doing so, he redefined the geography of Jerusalem and unintentionally set future generations on a path of confusion, one that persists to this day. Now, let's fast forward to the 1st century and ask a bold question. If Yeshua said not one stone would be left upon another, and Josephus confirms the temple was completely destroyed, then why are those massive walls on the Temple Mount still standing? What survived may not be what we think it is. By the 1st century, the Second Temple, originally rebuilt by Zerubbabel, had been expanded and glorified by Herod the Great. What once was a humble post-exilic structure had become a magnificent gleaming complex, far larger than Solomon's original design. It was this temple, Herod's renovation of Zerubbabel's temple, that stood in Yeshua's day. And it was this temple that would become the center of a world-altering prophecy. Standing outside its courts, Yeshua of Nazareth, our Messiah, uttered these words in Matthew 24:2. "Do you not see all these? Truly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." A shocking claim. And yet, only a few decades later, it came to pass. In 70 AD, the Romans, led by General Titus, invaded Jerusalem, crushed the Jewish revolt, and destroyed the temple. They burned it, toppled its columns. And according to Josephus in Wars 7.1.1, they left nothing standing. Caesar gave orders that they should now demolish the entire city and temple. It was so thoroughly laid even with the ground by those that dug it up to the foundation that there was left nothing to make those that came thither believe it had ever been inhabited. So here's the problem. Yeshua said, not one stone will be left. Josephus confirms the destruction was total. And yet, today, when you visit Jerusalem, you're shown the Western Wall, what many believe is a surviving remnant of that temple. But those stones are massive, perfectly intact, still stacked, one upon another. This contradiction has bothered scholars and believers for centuries. How can we reconcile Yeshua's prophecy and Josephus's account with what we still see today? What if? The answer is that those stones weren't part of the temple at all. What if we've been standing in the shadow of something else entirely? Let me introduce you to Fort Antonia, a Roman military fortress built just north of the temple to guard it and keep Jerusalem under Rome's control. Josephus described it as large enough to house a full legion, over 6,000 soldiers. It had barracks, towers, armories, and a commanding view of the temple courts. And here's what many researchers now believe. Those massive stones still standing today, the ones we call the Western Wall, they may not be remnants of the temple, but of Fort Antonia. Think about it. When the Romans conquered Jerusalem, would they have destroyed their own fortress? Unlikely. They preserved what belonged to them and obliterated what belonged to the Jews, just as Yeshua said. So if the temple was completely destroyed and Fort Antonia survived, then what we call the Temple Mount today may actually be the Fortress Mount. And the real temple? It may have stood somewhere else entirely. So where did the temple of Yahweh actually stand? To answer that, we need to look not just at stonework and ruins, but at the Bible itself. Because the temple wasn't just any building. It was a place of worship, of cleansing, of atonement. A place where priests served daily and where blood and water flowed continually. And that brings us to one of the most overlooked necessities of the temple, water. The temple needed an abundant, ongoing natural water source. Why? For ritual cleansing of the priests, Exodus 30:17 through 21, washing sacrificial instruments, cleansing blood from temple courts during feast days, and maintaining the mikveh, the immersion pools used by the people and the priests. But here's the problem. The Temple Mount, as we know it today, has no natural water source. None. No spring, no underground stream, no access to living water. In fact, ancient engineers had to devise massive aqueducts to try to bring water in artificially from miles away. Does that sound like the location Yahweh would have chosen? Now compare that to the Gihon Spring, located just below the eastern ridge in the city of David. The Gihon is the only natural spring in all of ancient Jerusalem. It flows constantly, bubbling up from the rock, even during drought. It's where Solomon was anointed king, 1 Kings 1:38-39. And it is directly connected by both geography and scripture to Zion. Psalm 132:13-14 says, "For Yahweh has chosen Zion, he has desired it for his dwelling place. This is my resting place forever. Here I dwell, for I have desired it." 2 Chronicles 3:1 says, "Then Solomon began to build the house of Yahweh at Jerusalem in Mount Moriah, in the place that David had prepared on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite." And where was David's city? Where was Mount Zion? Not on the current Temple Mount, but on the southeastern ridge, near the Gihon Spring. Even the prophet Ezekiel gives us a directional clue in Ezekiel 8:16. 25 men stood in the inner court of the temple with their backs toward the temple and faces toward the east, worshiping the sun. That only makes sense if the temple faced east, toward the Mount of Olives, and that alignment matches the geography of the city of David and the Gihon Spring. It does not match the current orientation of the Temple Mount Plaza, which faces north-northeast. The more we follow the clues, the more everything points away from the traditional Temple Mount and toward the ridge Simon the Hasmonean reshaped, the city of David. So how did we lose Mount Zion? The answer begins with a hero of Israel and ends with unintended consequences. Simon the Hasmonean reshaped Jerusalem. He destroyed the Acra fortress and leveled the mountain it sat on, the original Mount Zion. Then, he moved government buildings and the name Mount Zion to the southwestern hill. That single act changed the map. Over time, generations forgot where the original Zion had stood and where the temple once stood. Then came the Romans. They destroyed the temple but preserved their own fortress, Fort Antonia. And by the time of Constantine and Helena, 300 years later, the temple's true location had already been misidentified. Helena chose the wrong location based on tradition, not scripture, she saw the massive stone platform and assumed it was the temple, and that error was passed down for centuries. But beneath that confusion, the original Zion slept, until now. In the last few decades, archaeologists have begun uncovering the real city of David. They've found David's palace. They've traced the path of the Gihon Spring. They've found fortifications and stepped stone structures exactly where Scripture said Zion once stood. So what does all this mean? Is this just a historical correction, or is it part of something far greater, something prophetic? Because Zion isn't just a place. It's a symbol, a destiny. It's where Yahweh said his throne would be. And if we've misplaced Zion, then what might happen when the world begins trying to rebuild a temple on the wrong foundation? Today, movements are calling for the construction of a third temple on the current Temple Mount. But if that platform is actually Fort Antonia, those plans are not aligned with Scripture. And if a false temple is built, it may become the very stage upon which the man of lawlessness sets up his seat. 2 Thessalonians 2:3-4 warns us of that deception. But the remnant is awakening. Yahweh is restoring all things. He's calling his people back to his Torah, back to his appointed times, back to his covenant, and yes, back to Zion, because the truth is rising from the dust, and the stones of Zion are crying out again.